Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Friday, May 8th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside today, temperatures will reach a high of 75.3 degrees, while dipping to a low of 57.4 degrees, offering a very comfortable climate for your Friday. Later in the show, we will be analyzing the ongoing obstacles preventing the United States mission to push through the Iranian blockade. We are also looking at how a major digital attack on the Canvas platform has created significant instability for final exams across the globe. Plus, we will cover a range of additional stories that are shaping our world right now. There is a lot to discuss in this episode, so make sure you stay tuned for all that and more on Alex's News. Good morning. The world's most important oil choke point is once again at the center of a high-stakes military and diplomatic showdown. U.S.-led Operation Project Freedom, designed to break Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, is sitting in what officials are calling a temporary pause, even as warships and fighter jets stand ready. For the latest, we're joined by our reporter Ethan. Ethan, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. It's a fast-moving story, and there's a lot to unpack.
Let's start at the beginning. How did we even get to a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz?
This all traces back to February 28th of this year, when the United States and Israel struck targets inside Iran. That ignited a regional conflict, and Tehran retaliated by closing the strait, which is the world's most vital oil artery. By April, the U.S. had set up its own blockade of Iranian maritime traffic. But according to the Indian Express and Lloyd's List intelligence, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 neutral commercial vessels were trapped in the Persian Gulf, with crews running dangerously low on food, fuel, and water.
That's an enormous humanitarian problem. How many crew members are we talking about?
Estimates range from 2,000 to as many as 23,000 civilian crew members caught in the middle. They effectively became hostages to the conflict, even though their countries had nothing to do with it. That's the backdrop for what President Donald Trump announced last Sunday, May 3rd, calling it, quote, a humanitarian mission and a gift to the world, end quote. He named it Project Freedom.
And the scale of this operation, from what I understand, was massive.
Massive is the right word, Grace. According to the War Zone and Militarny, U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, was overseeing roughly 15,000 service members. There were more than 100 aircraft involved, including land-based fighters and carrier-based strike groups. The Pentagon also folded in next-generation AI-enabled tactical networks and a fleet of Navy-guided missile destroyers. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who's now using the revived title Secretary of War, described it as a, quote, powerful red, white, and blue dome, end quote, providing 24/7 overwatch for merchant ships.
A powerful image. So how did the launch actually go on Monday?
The early hours looked like a success. 2 U.S.-flagged vessels, including the Alliance Fairfax, transited the strait under military protection. U.S. forces also engaged and sank 7 Iranian fast-attack craft that tried to interfere with that first convoy. So in the opening window, the dome appeared to be holding, but less than 48 hours later, everything changed.
That's where Tuesday's surprise pause comes in. What happened?
On Tuesday, May 5th, just 3 days ago, President Trump abruptly suspended the escorts. Publicly, he cited, quote, great progress, end quote, in diplomatic negotiations being mediated by Pakistan and China, hinting that a peace deal might be close. But reporting from NBC News, The New York Times, and The Wall Street Journal told a much more volatile story behind the scenes.
What were they hearing?
They reported that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait had been, quote, blindsided, end quote, by the launch of Project Freedom. Riyadh and Kuwait City said they were never consulted on the rules of engagement or what Iranian retaliation might look like. So in response, both countries revoked U.S. military access to their airspace and, critically, to Prince Sultan Air Base, known as PSAB. That single decision essentially knocked the legs out from under the operation.
I'd imagine the U.S. has other bases in the region. Why was Prince Sultan so important?
The U.S. does maintain major hubs at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar and at Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. But those facilities alone simply couldn't sustain a mission of this size. The Wall Street Journal's analysis pointed to what they called the tanker gap. For F-15Es and F-35s to fly 24/7 combat air patrols over the strait, they need constant aerial refueling.
And those tankers usually fly over Saudi territory?
Exactly. The KC-46 tankers normally loiter in safe tracks over Saudi airspace. Without that access, they were forced into narrow corridors over the Gulf itself, which made them vulnerable to Iranian missiles. That, in turn, drastically reduced the loiter time of the fighter jets above the strait. On top of that, moving the more than 100 aircraft staged at PSAB to other bases created what the Wall Street Journal called a basing bottleneck, and the Pentagon couldn't fix it overnight.
So the diplomatic break really was the deciding factor. How serious was that rift with the Saudis?
NBC News characterized it as the most significant dispute in Saudi-American military relations in years. Gulf leaders were reportedly incensed that U.S. officials had downplayed recent Iranian strikes on the UAE's oil hub at Fujairah. There was a phone call between President Trump and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, often called MBS, and by all accounts, it didn't go well. The Saudis emphasized that they would not allow their territory to be used as a launchpad for, quote, offensive, end quote, strikes against Iran.
So how did the U.S. start to repair that relationship?
Washington sent a heavy-hitting diplomatic team. That included Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Envoy Steve Witkoff. They offered several specific security guarantees to Gulf allies. First, an explicit defense commitment, a formal promise to defend Saudi and Kuwaiti territory from Iranian retaliation. Second, a coordination mandate requiring prior consultation before any major military movements. And third, a multilateral framework, partnering with Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE to draft a United Nations Security Council resolution that would give the mission international legal standing.
Did those guarantees actually work?
They did, at least on the access question. By yesterday evening, May 7th, both the Wall Street Journal and I-24 News reported that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait had officially lifted the restrictions and restored U.S. access to Prince Sultan Air Base. So as of this morning, the airspace problem that crippled the operation is technically resolved.
Then why is Project Freedom still officially paused today?
That's the central question, Grace. Reports from AFP and Al Hadath indicate that the U.S. has resumed flights from PSAB. CENTCOM also reported earlier today that 2 U.S.-flagged vessels successfully transited the strait, which analysts are describing as a soft restart of the mission. But the Department of Defense has not formally announced a full resumption of the escort program. The White House appears to be deliberately holding it back.
Holding it back as leverage, you mean?
Exactly. Officials are essentially using the threat of a full resumption as a, quote, sword of Damocles, end quote, hanging over the negotiations underway in Islamabad. Iran has submitted a 14-point peace proposal through Pakistan. But as of today, Tehran has described the U.S. counterproposal as, quote, difficult to accept, end quote, largely because of restrictions on its nuclear program. So the pause itself has become a bargaining chip.
And meanwhile, the situation on the water is still dangerous?
Very much so. Despite all the talk of peace, the Indian Express reports there was an exchange of fire earlier today near Kashim Island between Iranian forces and U.S. warships. So even with the diplomatic window open, the ground, or rather the sea, remains volatile. President Trump himself has said that while the ceasefire, quote, remains in effect, end quote, he's prepared to, quote, resume bombing, end quote, if a final agreement isn't reached swiftly.
What should our viewers be watching for in the next few days?
A few things, Grace. First, whether CENTCOM formally relaunches the full 24/7 escort dome, or keeps relying on these quiet vessel-by-vessel transits. Second, the pace of the talks in Islamabad, particularly any movement on the nuclear question that's currently the sticking point. And third, whether the United Nations Security Council resolution actually materializes, because that would give Project Freedom a legal foundation it doesn't have right now.
And the humanitarian piece, those trapped crews, are they any closer to getting out?
only marginally. A handful of vessels have made it through under U.S. protection, but the vast majority of those 1,500 to 2,000 ships are still stuck inside the Gulf. Until the escort program is fully restored or a ceasefire is locked in, most of those crews remain in limbo. That's really the human cost driving the urgency of these negotiations.
A truly precarious moment in the Persian Gulf. Ethan, thank you so much for walking us through it.
My pleasure, Grace.
And now to our second story this morning, a cyber attack that's thrown the academic world into chaos, just as final exams kick into high gear. Joining us with the latest is our tech reporter, Chloe. Chloe, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. Yeah, this one's enormous. The Canvas learning management system, used by nearly 9,000 schools worldwide, was hit by a major breach late Thursday afternoon, May 7th. That's yesterday. Millions of students and faculty are essentially, as one source put it, dead in the water, right when they need access to lecture slides, assignments, and grading tools.
So who's behind it? And how did students even realize something was wrong?
The group claiming responsibility is a cybercriminal collective called Shiny Hunters. According to the Independent and U.S. News and World Report, students logging in yesterday found the standard Canvas portals replaced with a black and white ransom note. The message taunted Canvas's parent company Instructure, saying, quote, "Shiny Hunters has breached Instructure again. Instead of contacting us to resolve it, they ignored us and did some security patches," end quote. So it's both a data theft and a very public humiliation.
Wow. And what do we know about Shiny Hunters themselves?
The Associated Press, via Greenwich Time, describes them as a loose affiliation of teenagers and young adults based in the U.S. and the United Kingdom. Despite how young the members reportedly are, they've been tied to some massive breaches, including Live Nation's Ticketmaster, AT&T, and Microsoft. So this is not their first rodeo. They tend to favor extortion over straightforward ransomware, and that pattern is playing out here too.
Let's talk about Instructure's response. They actually took the platform down themselves, right?
That's right. To stop further data from being siphoned out and to deal with the defacement, Instructure intentionally pulled Canvas offline, including its beta and test environments. It's part of an emergency maintenance mode protocol, where they revoke compromised credentials and rotate API keys. The unfortunate side effect is a total global outage during arguably the most critical week of the academic year.
And how much data are the hackers actually claiming to have?
Shiny Hunters claims to have stolen 3.65 terabytes of data, comprising roughly 275 million records. Now, cybersecurity analysts at Lumu.io and Dataminar suggest those numbers may be inflated and that the data was likely pulled from a CRM or marketing database like Salesforce rather than active student enrollments. But even if it's smaller than advertised, it's still catastrophic. And the hackers have set a deadline of May 12th, that's this coming Tuesday, just 4 days from now, for what they're calling a settlement payment.
A settlement payment, meaning ransom. What happens if Instructure doesn't pay?
They've threatened to leak the entire trove publicly. Luke Connolly, a threat analyst at ImsaSoft, told reporters that a multi-day deadline like this often suggests extortion negotiations are quietly ongoing behind the scenes. So there may be back-channel talks happening right now. But of course, even paying doesn't guarantee the data won't eventually surface, which is part of why these situations are so fraught.
Now Instructure is saying the breach is contained. Is that holding up under scrutiny?
Not really, Grace. Instructure has publicly maintained that no sensitive data, things like passwords, social security numbers, or financial information, was compromised. But independent forensic analyses, plus reporting from Krebs on Security and the Daily Pennsylvanian, paint a much darker picture. Verified data samples shown to journalists include the full contents of Canvas inboxes, which hold billions of private messages between students and faculty. We're talking about disciplinary records, medical accommodations tied to IEP and 504 plans, and grade disputes.
Those messages sound incredibly sensitive. Does that trigger federal privacy laws?
It very likely does. Legal experts argue that because these communications are directly related to a student and maintained by the institution, they qualify as education records under the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. That means major university systems are now treating this as a high-severity FERPA event. It's a different and arguably more serious legal category than a typical consumer data breach, and it opens the door to federal scrutiny and potential penalties.
Speaking of federal scrutiny, are regulators stepping in yet?
They are. As of today, the U.S. Department of Education's Student Privacy Policy Office, known as SPPO, has opened an investigation into the breach. And a major class action lawsuit, Peterman v. Instructure, Inc., has already been filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Utah. The suit accuses the company of negligence and failing to implement industry-standard security measures to protect the data of those 275 million estimated users.
Let's bring this down to campus level. What are universities actually doing right now?
It's been a scramble, according to ABC News and U.S. News and World Report. The University of Texas at San Antonio, UTSA, pushed back finals scheduled for Friday and extended submission deadlines. Virginia Tech and Southern Methodist University rescheduled all Friday exams to Sunday, May 10th. That's 2 days from now. Arizona State University canceled all Canvas-based exams for the weekend and told faculty to adjust grading formulas.
What about the bigger name schools? I imagine Harvard students aren't thrilled.
No, they're not. The Harvard student newspaper reported the system was entirely down, leaving students unable to access even their final readings. Penn State canceled all testing center exams for Thursday night and Friday morning. And Georgetown, UC Berkeley, and James Madison University have either delayed exams or temporarily disabled Canvas links so students don't interact with the hackers' defacement messages.
There's also a phishing concern, isn't there?
Yes, and this is critical. The University of Florida issued an urgent warning for students to stay alert for phishing messages and what they're calling spear phishing campaigns. Because the hackers may have stolen student IDs and real names, attackers can craft very personalized, very convincing emails. So students are being told to be extremely cautious about any unsolicited message claiming to be from their school or from Canvas itself over the next several days.
How did the attackers actually get in? Do we know the technical entry point?
Cybersecurity firms like SockRadar and HackRead report that the breach likely originated from a compromise of Instructure's Salesforce and API infrastructure, rather than the core database itself. And here's the troubling part. This mirrors a previous breach back in September 2025. Analysts are sharply criticizing Instructure for failing to remediate those long-standing vulnerabilities. So this isn't being seen as a sophisticated zero-day, more as a known weakness that wasn't fully fixed.
With that May 12th deadline coming up Tuesday, what are IT teams bracing for?
Heightened alert across the board. IT departments at institutions like MIT, Stanford, and Oxford are operating under elevated security protocols, bracing for a potential mass leak of private student communications. Most Canvas systems have been restored to maintenance-level functionality as of today, but no one is calling this resolved. If the deadline passes without a deal, we could see one of the largest dumps of student records in U.S. history.
And what should students and faculty be doing this weekend?
2 practical things. First, monitor your institution's official system status page for the latest on exam schedules, because they are changing hour by hour. Second, exercise extreme caution with any unsolicited emails, especially anything asking you to click a link or log into Canvas from outside your school's official portal. Assume bad actors have your name and your student ID, and treat suspicious messages accordingly.
Really important advice. Chloe, thanks so much for walking us through all of this.
Happy to, Grace? We'll keep tracking it through the May 12th deadline.
That's our tech reporter, Chloe. We'll have more updates throughout the morning. Here are some other headlines. Tennessee has become the first state to finish its homework on new congressional boundaries, though critics say the state is simply drawing heat. Governor Bill Lee signed a redistricting plan on May 7th that effectively puts the state's 9th congressional district on the chopping block. By carving up the only majority Black and Democratic-held seat in the state, the plan spreads those voters across 3 Republican-leaning areas. This move follows a 6-3 Supreme Court ruling in Louisiana versus Calais, where Justice Samuel Alito found that creating majority-minority districts can be an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. To make this happen, the General Assembly had to repeal a 1972 law that kept mid-decade redistricting off the table. Speaker Cameron Sexton is defending the map as a partisan necessity for a 9-0 Republican sweep, while Representatives Justin Jones and Justin Pearson are calling it a return to Jim Crow tactics. The NAACP is already suing, claiming the redraw is illegal, but the clock is ticking. Candidates have until May 15th to qualify for the new boundaries. This sets a precedent that could see Alabama and South Carolina following suit to maximize their partisan advantage. Moving from maps to money, the administration's trade agenda just hit a major roadblock. The U.S. Court of International Trade ruled 2-1 that those 10% global tariffs were actually unlawful, marking a taxing development for the president. The judges found the administration improperly used the Trade Act of 1974 because they couldn't prove a large and serious balance of payments deficit. This follows a previous Supreme Court decision that struck down the Liberation Day tariffs. While the state of Washington and companies like Burlap and Barrel are celebrating the injunction, the Justice Department is expected to appeal. If this sticks, the government might have to shell out billions in refunds, adding to the $166 billion already mandated for return. In the world of media, we are mourning a man who truly knew how to stay tuned to the world. Ted Turner, the visionary who launched CNN and changed the way we watch the news, has died at the age of 87. Turner passed away peacefully in Florida after a long battle with Lewy body dementia. From building a cable empire with TBS and TNT to owning the Atlanta Braves, he was a giant in every field he touched. He was also a man of massive land and heart, pledging $1 billion to the United Nations and working tirelessly for land conservation. He was once the largest private landowner in the country, but he will be remembered most for his bison-sized impact on broadcasting. Turning overseas, North Korea is aiming high with some new hardware. Leader Kim Jong-un has unveiled a fleet of 155mm self-propelled gun howitzers designed to keep the southern border on edge. With a range of 60 kilometers, these systems put the capital of Seoul directly in the crosshairs. This military flex comes as Pyongyang officially ditches the idea of peaceful unification for a two-state system. Along with the artillery, a new 5,000-ton naval destroyer named the Cho Hyun is set to sail by mid-June, leaving South Korean officials searching for a sea of calm. Finally, Prime Minister Keir Starmer is finding that holding on to power is a real labor of love. In local elections, his party lost more than 250 seats and control of 8 local authorities. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage and Reform UK are having a field day, picking up over 350 seats in their first ever council. Starmer is facing calls to set a timetable for his exit as the United Kingdom shifts toward a more fragmented 5-party system heading into the 2029 general election. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.